Hey everyone, how's it going? Shuffles back here with another video, and today is tier list day. So we're gonna go through all the units that are relevant, I guess we'll say. There are a few 3 stars in here, some of the specialty changes. I didn't include them all because, quite honestly, there's a hell of a lot of units to go through, and this always ends up being about a 2-hour video. We're going to try and keep it as fast paced as possible. If anyone wants to post timestamps down below, you're more than welcome. But keep in mind, there's like over 100 units, so 100 timestamps might be a little ridiculous. We are going to start with the D tier and work our way up to triple S. We're going to go through all 3 elements of each tier. So if you're looking for a unit, that's how we're going to go. We're going to go from water, fire, wind, light, dark of the D units, and then we'll go up 1 tier at a time, just like that, and I'll try and explain every single unit along the way. If you have any questions or comments, or you agree or you disagree, make sure you leave them down in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. This video takes a crap ton of energy to put together. And finally, if you are looking for a hard copy of this, it will be posted in the Discord at some point next week. I'll leave a link in the description and in the comment section for the Discord. I do give it about a week or so before I post it because I want people to actually watch the video first so that a lot of my questions get answered in advance instead of just asking me the questions that I already answered in the video. Anyway, that's going to be it for me rambling. Let's jump over into the tier list here. If I can find the right button. All right, cool. Let me move this over. So for the first time, we have nobody in the question marks here. This is the first time, really, we've had nobody down there. I did wait a little bit longer to do this tier list just so that we, A, had the balance patch released, and B, had some time to use the new unit strays before I did the tier list. That way, we knew where to put them, and everybody is where they should be. Moving on into the D tier, we're not going to spend much time on it. We got Xeno, Zerato, Mercedes, Corvus, Haste, Quazu, Kizuna, Cartuja, Tierra, and I don't even know his name. Leo, ML Leo. All in the D tier. I'm not going to go over them individually. That's why we're going to be a little bit zoomed out here for the first couple of levels, and then we'll zoom in a little bit just to make sure everybody can see what's going on. We did last time have a few people question if we could try and increase the resolution. Um, so hopefully zooming in will help that. It's kind of hard to see sometimes from this far away. Moving up into the C tier, we have Collie, Clarissa, and Crozet. Like I said, I'm not going to go over all of these. You can use all 3 of these units in Wyvern, but they don't really have a use beyond that, except for maybe early game farming. Again, this is more of a late game tier list, so in terms of later game content, you don't really need these units. So if you're a newer game player watching this video, you might want to try and avoid these units if possible, and try and if you can use things for your Wyvern team that are higher up on the tier list, then maybe you'll be able to use them as you progress later in the game, and it may save you some resources. Moving on to the fire units, we got Cirilla, Era, Bingo, and Kawana. None of these are really usable. You could force use them in Golem if you want, but if you're farming Golem, then you have bigger issues than watching the tier list. There are no nature units in this tier list, and no light units. The only dark unit is ML Kawana. Could argue maybe she should be one higher, but really, she's really tough to use right now. She does have a cleanse, and the cleanse is actually really good because it comes equipped with the speed buff. But unfortunately, there's just people that do her job better. So let's move up into the B tier, and we'll start breaking things down 1 unit at a time. So let's zoom in here. God, I hope this works because we've already started the video. Close enough. We can move over. All right, there we go. So starting into the C tier, we're going to go all the way across the C tier, and then the B, and then the A, etc. Starting with Collie. Wait, we just did the C tier. Never mind. Cancel that. Moving on to the B tier. Not going to bother editing that out. So starting at the top of the B tier, these are all units who you could use if you want to. There's probably better though. Kind of similar to the A tier, but I would actually recommend probably not building these units unless you're desperate, because there are definitely better options. Leading off, we're going to lead off with Says. He's a good AoE nuker if you need to build him, but like I said, better options. Regular Dominielle, she's a great imprint. If your CDOM's not triple S, that's probably where she should go first. She does have damage reflection that you could use in PvP if you really wanted to. I don't necessarily recommend it because it's not overly strong, but you can if you want to have some fun. Just not very good late game PvP unit and doesn't really have any uses PvE. Moving over to Lulu, one of the cuter units in the game. Unfortunately, she doesn't really have much of a place. I still feel like she could be good in RTA, but you have to invest so heavily into her. It's kind of risky. She does have a place in Wyvern if you don't have a defense breaker, but there's a 3-star defense breaker in the Terranor Guard that you could use who's going to do the job better. So you're probably better off just building him or Furious. But if you just want the waifu part of it, then she can do the job just fine. Speaking of Furious, he's on here as well. He's literally only a Wyvern defense breaker. If you need a defense break for Wyvern, he makes the list just because of that. He has no use anywhere else. Moving on, we have Kreen. So Kreen is a good damage dealer that can also defense break, so you could use her in that role. She's a little more flexible than anybody else on the list. You could make an argument for her moving up into A tier because her damage is decent, but really she has no spot in PvP. And unless you're really dominant in PvE, you're gonna have a tough time moving up these tier lists because so many things can be used in PvE that in order to be a really good unit in the game, being good at PvE just it doesn't do enough. It's not gonna. You could use those PvP units to get the job done instead of building somebody like this for both. Just save your resources. Moving on to Fire, we have Fire Shuri, first one up. He is a great imprint, as he does have a 12-speed imprint. Or wait, actually, he has a 14-speed imprint. So he is tied for the highest imprint in the game, which is nice. And he can do some damage if you build him on a damage build, and he does have a CR boost. He is, however, mainly a PvE unit, and he's great at that. But if you need a really fast speed imprint because you're cleaving or you don't want to get cleaved and you want to try and get first turn, you can bring him. Beyond that, he doesn't have much of a role, but as far as imprints go, he has one of the best imprints in the game. There are a lot of other imprints that I put ahead of him, and I'm gonna explain why when we get to them. So hold on for that one. Up next, we have Holiday Euphine, the first unit on the list that got a buff. Unfortunately, her buff is kind of bad, and it doesn't really do much for her. She's still B tier. I think I had her at the bottom of B tier before, and or maybe even C tier last quarter, but she moves up very slightly, but I still don't think she's good. She again, similar to what we mentioned before, she has a cleanse, but the cleanse, there's just so many better cleansers out there that there's really no point using Holiday Euphine. I know a couple people that use her, but it's kind of tricky. As her cleanse just isn't as good as it only cleanses 2 buffs, and cleansing 2 buffs and not putting up immunity kind of makes her more of a liability than a help. Up next, we have Mascot Hazel. If you happen to run an all-fire team, Mascot Hazel is great because she can provide greater attack. But if you're running an all-fire team, you're probably doing Golem, and we already mentioned that in the last tier. If you're doing Golem, you got bigger problems than this. So I would probably steer away from her unless you're trying to do some gimmicky thing in Arena or Guild War. Up next, we have Saul. Saul is a great Golem unit. We've already talked about how I feel about that. So you should not build him in any way, shape, or form. He is a little bit better since his buff 2 buff patches ago, but I haven't seen a single person use him since the first day, and there's a reason for that. So let's move on into the nature units. First up, we have Rin. There are a couple people using Rin in RTA. It's a little bit gimmicky, but she can work. I do think there's better options out there, but you can use her. She's a fun support that adds a bunch of RNG to the fight if that's what you're looking for. Next, we have regular Lots, who isn't great, but he does have a huge CR boost, and he's got a heal. Great in PvE. You could potentially use him. I see some people run double Lots Sermia comps. Um, Probably just not recommended. Up next, we have Leo. Leo moves up to the... What are we in here? We're in the B tier, right? This is the problem with being all zoomed in. Yeah, moves up to the B tier because he is good for one-shot hunt comps. So later on in game, when you are trying to run one-shot comps, you could be running Leo, as he can help with that. Up next, we have Ervelyn. Again, he might be good in the new side story content, the Frost, whatever it's called. Uh, I haven't seen anybody bother building him for that, as there's just other things you can use to complete it. He really doesn't have a place in the game right now, anywhere, PvP, PvE, or otherwise. Next up, we have Ludwig. They've tried buffing him a few times. It obviously hasn't worked. Still nobody uses him. He does do huge damage. The problem with that is that he's kind of niche, and you can't use him everywhere. So if you're putting your very best gear on him in order to make him work, that gear would be better off used elsewhere. So if you happen to have a ton of extra damage gear, you could build him and make him useful. But like I said, that gear's probably just better off on someone else, which means you wouldn't be able to use him on leftover gear because he does have pretty high gear requirements to function properly. Up next, we have Silk, and Silk's another one along with Lulu that I think could be good in RTA, but I've never seen anyone try it. So if you're looking for a fun unit to try, she does have a speed buff and a slow on the same skill. So somebody like Cerise, somebody like Landy, all these speed manipulation units, she could provide that for you if you don't have those units and you want to try something new. Beyond that, pretty much PvE unit. I don't necessarily recommend building her, but she could be fun. Then we have Armin. I have seen a few people use Armin in Guild War, just as a nature tank, but there's not a lot of fire units you need to tank out there other than Ravi, and you don't really want to use it against somebody like Carrot. So because Carrot's more prevalent, you could even argue that Armin probably drops down this tier list a little bit. Up next, we have Purgus. I'm going to move that over a little bit because he's kind of overlapping. Purgus, I have seen him recently a fair amount in RTA, which is kind of strange. He's sort of making a comeback. He used to be really prevalent in Arena, and then he died off. But he's got a really high AoE counter rate, and he can counter stun and do a good amount of damage as well. He's not bad. If you need like a gimmicky counter cleave unit, you could bring him. The problem is there's so many good counter cleave units out there right now that you're probably better off building someone else. But if you want to build him for counter cleave and you think he will help, then go for it. Moving on over to the light and dark units. Again, no light units in this tier. But into the dark units, we have Celestial Mercedes. Celestial Mercedes, funny enough, is the best in slot bizarre defense break cleaver for Arena. Now, unfortunately for her, that is a very niche category. There's very few defenses out there that you can bizarre defense break cleave right now. You could bizarre Elfelt, bizarre Flan, or bizarre Tywin into her. Those defenses, she works amazingly well. If that's what you're looking for, she's best in slot. Put her on a rage set, and she'll do incredible things for you. Nobody will do better damage than she will. But you can't use her anywhere else, which is problem number one. And two, there's just other units you could use that would almost do the same thing. She's kind of overkill. You could just bring another AoE unit in there that you have other uses for. And they will also be able to clear it. So, as fun as she is, and as nice it is for her to have a use, unfortunately, she's going to stick down in the B tier. Up next, we have Assassin Cartusia. otherwise known as Fat Cat. He is a pure counter cleave unit. He had a huge place in Arena for a bit. You do every once in a while see somebody just pick and pray him in RTA and hope that they can get the miss they need in order to win the fight. But with such a low chance for that to proc, and evasion being such a random mechanic, he kind of falls down to this tier just by default. But again, if you need an unreliable counter cleave unit, you could bring him. And then finally for the B tier, we have Dark Corvus. Uh, Standard Guild War, take half an hour to do your clear but win unit. If you are having a hard time in Guild War and you have him, you can just Dark Corvus if you want to. In my opinion, there are things that are 100 times better, and they're going to be 100 times faster. So I don't recommend building him if you have him, unfortunately. But maybe he'll get a buff sometime in the future, and he'll find a place in the game. All right, let's come back over to the A tier. Man, this zoom in nonsense is messing with me. I hope you guys like this better, because if not, I'm not doing it ever again. Moving on to A tier. A tier is a huge tier, so there's a lot of kind of good, kind of bad units in the game. Those middle tier that you're not going to see a lot in RTA, but they could be used if you wanted to. That's kind of where this is. Basically, a tier where there's just better out there. But still a step up from the B tier, obviously. So starting with the A tier, we have Chloe. Chloe's a decent Wyvern unit. You can use her in fast clear. She's got a defense break, a strip. The nail is an interesting mechanic. She used to be much wider used, but really not anymore. The problem is that she's just too easy to kill. So in PvP, she's kind of hard to use that way. And then again, you can just find better things for Wyvern. So even though she's got an amazing kit, we just don't see as much of her as we used to. And I wouldn't be surprised if she gets a buff at some point. Up next, we have Tywin. So Tywin got trumped by Flan, and Flan is only in this tier. So you could argue that Tywin should move down just because Flan is basically a better version of him. He does have a defense break, and if you burn into it, he can take another turn and then attack buff somebody else. She does the same thing, except she doesn't hit, which means she can't be countered. Also means she can't miss on nature units or evasion units, and her buff is not only attack buff, but it's also crit damage buff. So in every way, shape, and form, she is better than him. Unfortunately, they're both really hard to use, and neither of them can hold souls. The benefit with her is that she, on top of what we already mentioned, she can hold that new artifact, her own artifact, that can give you 10 souls back after you burn into her, which is kind of nice. The only downfall is that if you get countered, he could have Aureus or something and maybe protect you. But if you're looking for that bizarre defense break combo, you're probably using Flan or Elfelt. Flan is a weird kind of unit right now, and I know a lot of people are probably going to be mad at me for putting her in this tier because a lot of people are Flan cleaving in, or were Flan cleaving in RTA. That's died off a lot. You don't see nearly as many Flans as you used to at the end of last season, just because people have learned how to counter it. It's actually quite easy to counter if you know what you're doing. So, and also one of the best units in the game right now is an OP Flan counter, and we'll get to her later. But I can't justify moving her up any higher than this. I have her, I've tried her, and outside of essentially a worse version of Oxlots, I can't really see any reason to move her any higher than this, even though she has a very interesting kit and she's better than Tywin. So, final thoughts. Best in slot for Basar Tywin comp, or yeah, well, Basar Flan comps, but outside of Arena, that doesn't really work anywhere. So, moving on, we have Angelica. Angelica's still really good early game. She got a nice buff where she can now cleanse as well. She can be used against Carrot if you're struggling against Carrot because she could go first and put up 2 buffs, and then Carrot can't get through the 2 buffs and debuff you. Um, I played around with it for a bit and it was fun, and it does work, but there's probably more reliable things out there. Then we have Yuna. Yuna's gotten a couple of buffs recently, and although she's great for tower, or used to be great for tower, but you can still use her in tower now that it's changed. I used her in the new side story content as well. She can be used as CR booster. She's just somewhat hard to use. She can also do big damage. I actually lost to a Yuna recently in RTA. But she she's not one of those must build units. There's definitely better out there. You can use her if you want to, but there's better out there. Speaking of there being better out there, we have Yuna. People have been calling for a Yuna buff forever. We haven't gotten it. We kind of got one with the exclusive, but she's not great. She can be used in Wyvern, but her damage is so sporadic. It's very random. So if you get a min hit with her S1, she does no damage, and if you get a max hit, it does huge damage. If you're into ultra RNG damage outputs, then go for it. But I personally prefer something a little more reliable, so that's why I've got her in the A tier. Then we have Roman. We don't see him anywhere. I think he is severely underrated. He's a great strip. There's just so many better strips out there that people forget about him, but he is still good. So he gets the A tier, even though nobody really uses him. Like I said, though, we're gonna come across probably 10 other strips in the game that are ahead of him. So next up, Ida. So Ida is a stun. She's got a strip. She's got an interesting kit. You're not gonna see her a lot. She's another one where she got a really interesting kit and she can work. But there's again just better options out there, and for that reason, she can't go any higher on the list. Next up, we have Melissa. She's been in the same mediocre spot for quite a while now. Actually, since her release, she's really never been good. There was a point where people were trying to use her against Rylet, and if you're going against a slow Rylet, that's fine. But if you go against a fast Rylet, the Rylet's just going to kill her, and you're dead. So it really doesn't make any sense to build her as a Rylet counter, unless it's for Guild War, which is the one alternative. You could bring her in Guild War because you can control who he targets, and then she can just go into him regardless of build. So in that very specific case, she's very good, but beyond that, she really has no place in the game at all. Next up, we have Surmia. She kind of fits in the same spot. She's a single target nuke that can potentially do damage with really, really, really good gear, but there's better options out there. Like, she's fire. Why would you not bring Watcher Shuri? Watcher Shuri ignores defense. He's going to do more damage, and he's element neutral, and he brings a speed imprint. She's basically a really bad Watcher Shuri, and Watcher Shuri's not overly high on the list either. So even though she's good and she can put up some flashy numbers, where is that damage useful? You're not going to bring her into RTA. You could force her into Arena or Guild War, but realistically, there's just better options. So because of that, she's going to stay in the A tier. Lytika's up next. Very similar to ML Lytica and a couple other strips. So again, kind of like the Roman and all these other units in this tier, she does have a lot of potential. She's got incredible base speed, but there's just better. You could find somebody that does the same job that is more reliable or does it better. So that's why she falls to the A tier. Surin is another one. Surin used to be the only speed imprint in the game that could kill Arby twice. Now that Sid got his buff, he can do it reliably. So he is now going to be ahead of the Surin instead of them being in the same tier. She's still very good, and she does have a 14 speed imprint tied with the Shuri down here. But the Surin, even though she can put out decent damage, and I used to use her in RTA quite a bit, the Sid's kind of taken her place. Moving over, we have Maya, and Maya is another one that, kind of like the Armin we talked about earlier, You can use her as a tank in Guild War if you want to, but again, there's so many good tanks out there that you really just don't need to build Maya, and giving her Molas, I think, is a little bit of a waste. Next up, we have Ball Model Kana, connection unit, relatively new to the game. I think she was in the last tier list, but she had just been released. We had her in this tier, and we're going to leave her in this tier. She's very good for the nature expedition, as she can hit the boss and the crystal at the same time. Beyond that, however, she doesn't really have a place. So if you want to build her for that, because you need a unit that hits both for your, for your nature expedition, then go for it. But other than that, I wouldn't recommend it. And finally, for the A tier in the fire class, we have Ilanav. Ilanav is very interesting. She does have a crit damage buff, so she can pair very well with units like Alencia, Chu, Lilibet, stuff like that. Damage dealers that don't do damage scaling on attack. If you're doing damage that scales on attack, you may as well bring an attack buff, which is much more common and a lot easier to use. But if you're bringing bruisers that scale based off HP, you can bring her, and that crit damage buff does help you do a lot more damage. I have used it in RTA. It's not great, however, because odds are what they're going to do is they're going to ban your whatever your damage dealer is, and then you're going to be stuck with her, and she's not going to do much. Whereas with attack buffs, a lot of attack buffs have boosts or heals or something else to go with them that makes them usable, even if that damage dealer gets banned. That's kind of the problem with her. So she's not bad, but there's just better options out there. You don't really need the crit damage buff. It's not going to help you all that much. And outside of that, she has injury, and as we're going to see in a minute with more, injury isn't all that prevalent. All right, moving over to the wind units, and this is probably our most filled tier in the tier list, is the A tier wind units. We got a lot of mediocre wind units here. Starting with Ruzid. So, opener, small imprint with a speed buff and a boost. Again, better options out there. Biken can be used in one-shot comps if you want to give her some amazing gear. If you're a purely PvE main, then go for it, because she'd be great for like Banshee one-shots or whatever. But you're probably better off using that gear elsewhere. And unless you're very pay to win, there's no point having a one-shot team anyway, because you're going to run out of energy in about 35 seconds. Moving over, we have Rowana, and Rowana is a great SSB counter, but there's not as many SSBs out there as there used to be. You do still see her quite a bit on arena defense. If you are getting SSB'd a lot in arena defense, you can build her for that. My personal opinion is you don't necessarily need her, but if you have her, you can use her in certain situations. Like I used her in that new side story content because the middle boss, or the middle portion of the boss, does team up and counter a lot. So she was very good there. But outside of like being kind of niche, you probably don't need her. Also, you don't necessarily need to skill her up or anything like that. You can kind of use her as is. Because you probably won't use her much in PvP unless you're using her in arena defense. Up next, we have Lilibet. Lilibet, people have kind of forgotten about her. She is still one of the best RB counters out there. She can one-shot a degen RB. So if you're going up against degen RBs and having a hard time killing them with like your Lulu or your whoever you're using, you can definitely use Lilibet. Unfortunately, for most Lilibets, they got fed to ML Lilibet because she's so good, and they need that imprint. So she's kind of fallen off the table a little bit. If I ever summon another one, I would build her, just because I think she'd be fun to use in RTA, especially with all the degen RBs floating around. Next, we have Belina, the queen of PvE. One of the best PvE units out there, and one of the best Abyss units out there. It'll be interesting to see when the new Abyss floors get released if she gets some new life breathed into her. Because she doesn't really have a place outside of that. We don't really see her a lot in PvP. I did try and use her in like RTA, but it's very hard because she's kind of squishy with no sustain. She doesn't have a passive like SSB does that keeps her alive, so she just kind of dies. But yeah. fun unit, really good in PvE. Outside of that, though, if you're trying to use her in PvP, you're probably going to struggle. So that's why she is in the A tier. Next up, we have Mort. And I think Mort is underrated, but he was a tier up from this. I actually had him in S tier last quarter, and I dropped him down one. Reason being, the bruiser meta has slowed a little bit, and the control meta has slowed a little bit. And those are the two things he was good at. So I do feel like he's underrated in that meta, but with that meta being a little less than it was last season already, he's got to drop a tier. His the injury is completely useless on him. As a bruiser, though, he can do decent damage. He can't get stunned. He can defense break. He can anti-cleave with crit buff. He can be good in that role. But there is somebody new who can fill that role that wasn't on the tier list last time we had him up a tier that can do the same job, but just better. So we'll get to them later. But yeah, that's why he is in the A tier. Moving on, we have Moy. So I've actually seen a few Moys recently, but again, with the strips and debuffs kind of falling off a little bit compared to where it was last season or last quarter, she kind of drops a little bit in usefulness. She does have an attack buff, which is nice, and she can provide some RNG. If you see her on arena defense, that's why they've got her there. Just trying to get lucky into some wins, which is nice. But I don't know if she's worth mulling, and in order to use her in a defense setting, you'd want her mulled. So that's probably why you don't see as many of them as you would otherwise. But she's kind of an average strip. She's good. She does her job. But there's probably just better options out there. Then we have Destina. Destina, I actually also dropped a tier. Destina is one of my favorite units. Still think she's one of the best healers in the game. But there's not necessarily a use for pure healers right now. So she could be really good in like Abyss or in Raid. There's just not as much of a demand on pure healers right now that don't do anything else. She does have a cleanse, which is really important, but there's a lot of really good cleansers out there now too. And those cleansers not only cleanse, but they provide immunity or attack buff or revive or something else other than the cleanse. She does have the CR boost, which is nice. But all of that combined with the fact that she's kind of slow, I did drop her down from S tier. I still do have really good gear on mine. But a little foreshadowing, my DJ Bassar might be in the coin rotation next. It's actually predicted that he'll be in the coin rotation next. So I might be getting him, and her gear would go on to him. Next up, we have Celine. And Celine is a nice little counter cleave unit. And I love her art style, and unfortunately, I have no use for her in any of the content right now. I think she could be a decent bruiser if you wanted to heavily invest into her, but outside of that, I don't think she's very good counter cleave. She's too easy to play around, and with the single target damage, I think people are very used to her now, and she could use some help. So although I think she would work in like mid-tier RTA, even like semi-high tier RTA, at higher levels she falls off really, really hard. So that's why she's going to stay in A tier. There's just better options for counter cleave, and that's really her only purpose. Then we have Charles. Charles, the RNG king himself. He used to be the most prevalent Guild War unit. But because of the fact that there's a lot of anti-counter mechanics, and also with Carrot and Ravi out there, and more one-shot capable units, he's fallen off a lot. He is still the ultimate pick-and-pray unit for RTA. If you're way behind and you know you have no chance of winning, you pick him and hope he counters you into a win. But that's really the only place you would pick him in RTA. You'll still see him occasionally on defenses, but not very often, just because it's too easy to play around him if the person you're fighting is paying attention. Then we have Euphine. Euphine I also dropped down a tier. She was in S tier, and I think because of the new meta with things being more cleave heavy, she kind of falls off a little bit. Also, you'll notice when we get to the top of the list, it's a lot less RGB heavy than it has been in the past, as things have started to lean a lot heavier toward the light and dark units than toward the RGB units. And that's part of the reason why she takes a hit. She was the best SSB counter at one point, as she could just go in and one-shot her in Guild Wars, but now with no SSBs on defense anymore, that's pretty much the only reason she takes a hit. She's still got an amazing kit, and I feel like she could be more useful than she gets credit for. But I did drop her down, at least for the time being. We'll see. She may end up moving up because her kit is too good for her to be down here, but just in this current meta, she's a little tricky to use. Moving on to the light and dark units. What are we in here? I can't remember anymore. We're still in A tier? Oh my god. These videos take forever. Alright, A tier, we got Watcher Shuri. So we talked about speed imprints and one-shot units. He is slightly better than Sermian because he does have that speed imprint and he does more damage. I can't really justify him being much higher on this list. I think he could be S tier, but when we get to the S tier, you'll see the units in there are just really, really good. He is specifically used as an imprint. You can use him in other stuff just to one-shot things, like we did use him in the new, if you watch that video about the new side story Frost content stuff, we did use him for the Epic Hell phase at the end there. But outside of PvP speed imprints, that's really the only place you'll use them. Is he worth building? Definitely. Just for that reason, I would say he probably should be moved up. Maybe we put him in between tiers here because he's definitely worth building. If you have him, you should build him. Unlike most of the units in here, I would say there are better options. He is kind of the best speed imprint, so maybe he should move up one. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Shuri. Moving on, we have Guider Aether. Guider Aether is an interesting one. Gets shit on a lot, but the only mage in the game, which means she can hold book, Tagahale's ancient book, that also provides attack buff. So and does damage, I should clarify. Because Vivian can hold book and can give attack buff, but can't kill something at the same time. So very good for cleave teams, especially in arena. The problem is the base speed is so low, really hard to use in RTA. But she can be incredible for cleave teams in arena, especially because her attack buff and nuke isn't a non-attack skill, which means does very well against things like Polly, who is everywhere. So and keep that in mind. I don't see her a lot anymore. I used to use her in my arena offense, but kind of fallen off from those days. But still, keep in mind, mage with attack buff and an attack is always very strong and will always have a place somewhere. So if you get her, she's not great, don't necessarily build her, but hold on to her just in case, because that is a unique mechanic that nobody else has. Then we have Fighter Maya. Fighter Maya, one of the two defense, well, technically three, if you can't kick rat, but one of two prevalent defense scaling units in the game. So if you have defense damage based gear, you're probably putting it on her or the other defense based unit. She's very hard to use though. She does scale well in RTA, but she's not really used elsewhere. Her main use is Guild War tank. That's her prime place is a Guild War light tank for all the hard-hitting dark units. Yeah, outside of that, not much else to say about her. She hits hard. She's easy to gear because all of that gear can go onto her because there's nobody else to give it to. Then we have Wanderer Silk. Wanderer Silk has amazing base speed. I have seen her popping up here and there in RTA and in PvP. She does have, with that amazing base speed, she can go first and strip and bring somebody's CR all the way back to 0. So she could go before, say, a Cerise or something and reset their attack bar. Kind of niche, but really fun to use. One of the more fun units to use. Unfortunately, there's a lot of RNG associated with that, as we're going to talk about again with Rin. But very good unit nonetheless. And if you want someone with good base speed, say you don't have really good speed gear and you just need somebody to put your best speed gear on to hopefully outspeed those like Fliticas or Oxlots or whoever, you could try Wanderer Silk. Up next, we have Dingo, and Dingo is an interesting one as well because he also has an attack buff and can burn into huge damage AoE. Problem is now, when people were using him in RTA, nobody knew how much damage he could do. Now that he's been out for a while and people have seen it happen and have had it happen to them, he's a little easier to play around because you know it's coming. But still can do huge AoE damage and also give himself that greater attack buff. So keep that in mind with him. Uh, do I recommend building him? Not necessarily. There's a lot better AoE nukers out there, but he's fun and does have a heal and attack buff and invincibility. He's got a very flexible kit, especially for a Soul Weaver. If you're looking for a Soul Weaver that does damage, he could be a good option. Moving on to the dark units, we have Assassin Sid. Oops. Great countercleave unit, very similar to Wanderer Silk, slightly better than Wanderer Silk for countercleave just because he's got better base speed, and he can just nuke instead of relying on the pushback, so there's less RNG there as he could just kill something. Also, the fact that he strips souls, he takes 20 souls from the enemy, is what makes him really good. I'm going to skip over a couple and go to Kali because she's in that same vein. They're very similar units, and I get asked a lot who you should build as countercleave. As countercleave, the answer is Sid. As more offensive, the answer is Kali. But they're both very similar. They both have insane base speed. Assassin Sid's base speed is slightly higher. Kali can do slightly more damage. Kali stuns and then messes up the rest of the team by silencing, but if they have immunity, that doesn't work. Sid takes the souls either way. Personally, I'm using Kali. One, because of course waifu, and two, because I already had her plus 15. So for me personally, building the Sid just isn't worth it. I'm not going to go plus 15 another unit for an extra like 2 base speed. But if I had to pick, yes, the Sid would be better. Moving on, we have Crescent Moon Rin. So Crescent Moon Rin, great unit. Again, crazy base speed. I think 128. I think she got the second best base speed in the game, if I remember correctly. Or at least tied for the second best. Her main problem is, yes, she's amazing. She can go once, she can strip immunity, and then she can go again, and she can stun. Along with that, base speed can lock down anybody, similar to like a Wanderer Silk. The issue with her is those are 2 separate turns, which means 2 separate RNG checks on resistance. So you could be going against an Oxlots that has no res, and yeah, you might go first, but you get 15% chance to strip the immunity, and then 15% chance to get resisted when stripping immunity, and then same thing again when you're going to stun. And those 15% res checks are going to get you, especially if you have to go through them multiple times. So she can be very frustrating to use. The nice thing is she's a fantastic poly counter because she doesn't necessarily have to land. Putting up, if you still want to Oxlots cleave into a poly team, you can use Rin just to go first, put up immunity. And then even if she doesn't strip and stun the poly, your rest of your team still has immunity, and the poly can't do anything to you. So you don't have to worry about getting counter stunned or anything like that. Next up, we have Shooting Star Katie's. Shooting Star Katie's is one of the few revivers in the game. I actually saw her pop up a couple times in RTA this week. She's a very good reviver. It's not necessarily a reviver meta, however, other than Maid, but we'll get to her later. She's got decent base stats. She can be very scary to play against. Being a dark unit, though, you're very susceptible to getting LQC'd, and she's still 4-star, so 4-star base stats anyway. But she's still good. She's usable. I just think there's better options out there. And then we have Kitty Clarissa. Kitty Clarissa, Queen of Hall of Trials. You'll see her in pretty much every Hall of Trials team. Very good at that. She's also a very good cleanser. I forget which cleanser we talked about earlier. But she is... Oh, Euphine. Fire Euphine. She is better than Fire Euphine as she can be run with Strack as well as Euphine, but you can run her like 250 speed, 250 res, and then strip, cleanse, or well, you could cleanse and then either strip or team up proc, doing damage. Very nice to have those options. The problem with her is she doesn't really do a lot on turn one, so you can use her if you really need to. But especially with the debuff meta falling just a little bit this season, I don't think it's necessarily worth building her unless it's for Hall of Trials. That could change though, so we'll see. Next up, we have Inferno Kawazu. His first appearance on the list. Um, I decided to put him in this A rank because I think he is very easy to play around. He is good. When he does his job, he's great because he can just one-shot stuff. Unfortunately, if you're playing against somebody that knows what they're doing, they're just not going to AoE on turn one. So there is value in that, in stopping their AoEs on turn one. The problem is, once he's been played around, he's kind of useless, and that's a problem. So in a lot of situations, I think he's kind of a dead spot. But he is relatively new, so he could see some movement in the future. But for now, he's going to stick in this A rank. Then we have Shadow Rose. Shadow Rose got an interesting buff, and we moved her up the tier list because we really thought she was going to be really, really good and very prevalent. But then she just never really got much use outside the first week. She does have, if you burn into it, she can strip defense break every single turn, and very easy to get high effectiveness as well. So she can be used to counter those high res units. I think the reason we didn't see her a lot last season is because the resistance mechanic in RTA scaled very poorly. Um, we may end up seeing more Shadow Rose this season just because the changes in res. Um, the only reason I would say we might not is because it's kind of a cleave meta right now. There's so many people cleaving that if somebody's going to tank up, you're probably just going to try and kill them right away instead of trying to grind out a win with somebody like Shadow Rose. Then we have Archdemon Shadow. Archdemon Shadow, it's been a little while now. I had such high hopes for her with her seal. I love the idea of it, but the fact that it's only 75% chance to land makes her very, very RNG. That combined with the fact that um, the units you would want to seal would be SSB, who, if you miss and then you start proccing your extra turn and your skill 3 and all that stuff, you're actually feeding SSB more than you're helping. 2, you would want to use her against Arby. If you miss the seal and then kill Arby, he's just going to come back to life and wipe your whole team because you failed. And 3, Tempest Surin, and same thing there. If you miss the seal on her, it's just going to proc her passive, and then she's going to cut you and get a turn and AoE nuke you as well. So the 3 units that she would be best on, she's really risky into, which makes her very hard to use. You do still see her sometimes. People just use her to be annoying, but for the most part, in those situations, she can be annoying and you'll still win the fight because she just won't do much. She'll be busy being annoying, but not actually being productive. So that's why she's not higher on the list. Next up, BBK. One of the better AoE nukes out there. You can see I got her slightly ahead of that Celestial Mercedes we talked about in the last tier. She can be a decent bruiser as well and be really scary in PvP. You don't see her a lot because there's just better options out there, but she's still very good and can definitely be used. And finally, for this tier, we have MLKen. MLKen moved up a tier. He was down with Dark Corvus in the B rank last quarter, but he did get a big buff, and because of that, I did move him up a tier. I don't think it's the buff that he needed, which is why he's not up higher. I did see some people saying it was a nerf. It's definitely not a nerf. It's a nerf if you have really bad gear. But for the most part, it's a huge buff, actually. He gets bonus res. He can crit on his turns now, and he gets more turns. That's all around a win for him. He basically got 3 buffs because of that. And if you're building him the way he should be built, he'll probably be high res, and you don't really care about losing the immunity anyway, which would be the only downfall to it, would be losing the immunity on turn 1. I think he's much scarier now than he was before, but he's still not soloing much. He's still going to get one shot way too easily and ignored, basically, until it's 4v1. And he's not going to 4v1 a lot of stuff unless you're early game, or maybe early mid game. Come late game, you're going to be able to find a way to kill him. All right, let's come over, and we're up into the S tier now. And we're going to start with Crow. So we got Crow in the S tier. He was here last quarter, and he's going to be here again. Um, you guys know how I feel about Crow already. He's very tricky to use. A lot of people like bringing him because he's got a great defense buff, but there's so many other defense buffers in the game. I think you're just better off picking one of them. He is probably in a better spot now than he's ever been in because of Carrot. He's a very good Carrot counter because one, she's probably not going to land on him if you've got him geared, and two, he's automatically going to take ticks off of Aureus and bring him down. Um, so because of that, he's probably in a better spot than he's ever been in before. I still really don't like him. I know a lot of people do. This one's more preference than anything. You could argue he could be in double S tier. Um, but personally, I would bring any other. If you need a defense buff, I would bring any other defense buffer other than him. I personally, the main reason I don't like him is because I don't like conditional skill threes. I don't like skills that you can't use ever. So you can just ignore him, and part of the reason why I don't like ML Ken as well. Any unit that you can just ignore and they can't do anything to you doesn't seem like a very good unit to me. So that's why I'm not a big fan of him. But he still gets the S rank, which still is obviously very good. Being able to make it an S rank ahead of all those other units, he's obviously good. He just isn't somebody that I would personally use. Up next, we have Dizzy. Dizzy's somebody that's fallen off a lot. She's still very good and got a crazy kit, and I'm sure once Abyss comes out, the new Abyss floors, she'll be used a lot again. We just don't see her a lot in PvP these days because there's just so many cleansers out there to deal with her, and so many counters. But she's still very good. Don't sleep on her. If you have her, build her. But she's a limited unit, so if you don't have her, you're going to have to wait for her banner. Up next, we have Rose, and there was a time where Rose cleaves were all the rage. That has died off in a real hurry as people figured out how to counter it. But she's still very good. She's an attack buff with a boost a la Oxlots, except she does it to the whole team, which is very nice. She also has a cleanse. Very good kit. Very scary if you go in. If you see a Rose in RTA, you should be worried because you're about to get cleaved. Up next, we have Monty, and Monty is a good cleanser, but she's a good PvE cleanser. She's not great for PvP, unless it's like a guild war where you're controlling the situation and you know what's going to happen when. Um, but against any of the big debuffers, you're just going to get overwhelmed if you bring her. You're better off bringing someone else for PvP. But for PvE, she's fantastic. Moving on to the fire units, we have regular Ken. I think regular Ken's very underrated. Great bruiser. He's got a lot of defense breaks. He does big damage. I personally don't have one built, but if I did, I would probably use him. I think he's very scary to face, particularly if you happen to have a bunch of nature units on your team, or basically any non-water units on your team. Also, very tanky and scales off of HP, so keep that in mind. Well, actually, wait. I think he scales off of attack, but he scales very well and can be very tanky. Then we have Fireball. Fireball, I refuse to move down, even though nobody likes him. I'm convinced people don't like him just because of his artwork, but his kit is incredible. If you've ever read his kit is loaded. He's got a defense break. He's got 2 AoEs. He can hit 2 people with his S1. He can do good damage. AoE defense break. You can put him on Violin. He can AoE strip. He's got AoE slow. He's got AoE heal block. He can reset his own skill 3 with his skill 2. Like, his kit is ridiculous. He is also top notch for the Wind Expedition, as we talked about Bomb Model Kana. He's just better because he has a defense break as well. So if you're looking at one of the two and you don't mind the fact that his art is not good looking, then I recommend building him. He's also very good for raid and stuff like that if you need a defense breaker. And he actually for raid and labyrinth, he does very well with the what's that mechanic called? You guys know what I'm talking about. He has good scores when you camp and try and get your morale back. That's what it is. Up next, we have Tamarin, and Tamarin is probably the PvE healer queen. Um, she never gets used in PvP anymore. She used to be big in Arena, but nobody uses Tamized Area in Arena or Guild War or RTA. But she's still top notch. If you have her, you should build her because she is probably the best PvE healer out there. She does provide cleanse, CR boost, and attack buff for your whole team, and she can strip as well. You'll use her in raid, you'll use her in Heart of Trials, you'll use her in Abyss, you'll use her everywhere PvE. Then we have Kayron. Kayron moved down one. He's really not in a good spot in this current meta. He just gets cleaved way too easily, and he doesn't counter the current cleaves like he used to. So I did move him down one. He may actually move down further in the next tier list, but I figured we'd give him a month or a quarter to get himself sorted out. Excuse me. But yeah, he although he does big damage and he can AoE, he can also be really good for this nature expedition as well. But other than that, he just doesn't have much of a place right now. Then we have Acades, fantastic cleanser. We're getting up into the upper echelon of the cleansers now as we hit Monty already. Acades is another great PvE cleanser. She can also be used in PvP as she can cleanse every other turn. So if you think you're going to get debuffed consistently, then you can bring her. Most cleansers, though, you really only need to cleanse once and you're fine. So she would, for that reason, she wouldn't be the best option because you'd probably go with somebody that brings immunity. But if you need to cleanse more regularly, she is a good option. Then we have Polly, and Polly is very much up for debate. She's kind of in like a transition phase, as she was purely a defense unit and a counter cleave unit, but she's kind of transitioning, I find, more into offense now. People are using her in offense to try and counter things like Sage Ball and Alana, who people are using counter cleave. So they're using her to counter cleave as part of their cleave, if that makes any sense. So I put her in this S tier, up from A, because I really didn't think she was very good counter cleave. I do think she's better in an offensive setup. But we'll have to see what happens with her over the next little bit, as she is in a bit of a transition phase, as we don't see her in defense nearly as much as we did at higher levels in the past, but we'll see what happens with her in the next few months. Then we have Cowrick. I kept Cowrick S rank because when you see a Cowrick, you know he's going to be scary. I don't necessarily recommend building him, which would suggest that he should be in the A rank, but when you see him, you know he's going to be good and he's scary. There's another unit like that coming up in the nature units as well. And he can do things. Anything that can be irresistible is very, very good in this meta. So just because of that, he gets in this S rank, kind of sneaks in there. Then we have Elfelt. And Elfelt is an interesting one. I actually, funny enough, I've been bashing on her forever. I actually moved her up to S tier just because of the current meta. I do have her above Flan as well, as I do think the fact that she doesn't have a non-attack skill makes her more usable. The problem with Elfelt is she's very hard to use in RTA, so I still don't think she's good for RTA, but for Arena, I think she can be very good, as she can counter those polycomps. That being said, as Poly phases her way out, Elfelt could easily move back down again in the coming months. I guess I feel like I should expand on that a little more, or else I'm sure somebody will complain about it. She does have a defense break and an attack buff. The problem with Elfelt is she does 0 damage, and she can get resisted if you don't burn, and she can't provide herself souls. So that's kind of where her shortcomings are. I've had legend level Elfelts not be able to kill like a 10k squishy unit. I think you're better off just going something else in that situation if you're thinking about going Elfelt in RTA. But like I said, if you're just using her for defense break and attack buff, she's very good in like a bizarre Elfelt comp or something like that for Arena. Moving on, we have Adventurer Raz. Adventurer Raz took a big hit here. He was in double S last quarter, I did move him down. He went from one of the most annoying units in the game to just kind of average. He's much harder to use than he used to be, just because there's a lot more cleaves now and a lot more tanks, and I feel like there's just better options. Also, people used to pair him with Ravi, who also has moved down. We'll get to her in a bit. Um, but the stuff that was pairing with him, there is now counters to, whereas there wasn't before, and that's part of the reason why he moves down. Then we have Tenebria. Tenebria forever S tier. Poor Tenebrae, but she does have a great kit, a la Ball and Cezanne. She's got a defense break, a slow. She's got 2 AoEs. She can sleep. She can turn cycle. She can do it all. She's got an amazing kit. Um, for Wind Expedition, Ball and Cezanne is better. For PvP, Tenebria is better. But they're both very similar. They're both mages that do semi-similar damage. Tenebria is just cuter and has better animation. But other than that, very, very similar units. And finally, we have Lilius. And similar to Raz, she's also dropped a little bit for all the same reasons, because those team ups are not as useful as they once were. Also, her team ups are RNG based, so you'll see her a lot in Hall of Trials, but you don't see her a lot in RTA anymore. All right, moving over to the wind units now. First up, we have Vildred, and Vildred is arguably the best speed imprint in the game. He doesn't have the biggest speed imprint, but the fact that he's got an AoE nuke after it, and he self boosts whenever somebody dies, he is great in a cleave setup. For AoE cleave setups, the reason he isn't higher is because there aren't a lot of AoE cleave setups out there. But if you are AoE cleaving, say with that Bizarre comp we were talking about earlier, he is one of the best in slot for that reason. And then next speed imprint, we have Sid. Sid did move up this list. He was down a rank last quarter. He moves up because of his buff. His buff basically gives him his speed buff when he uses his skill 3. Before, he didn't get the speed buff when he used his skill 3. He had to skill 3, then he had to skill 1, give himself the speed buff, and then he had it for his third turn. Whereas now, you could S3 into Arby, kill Arby, giving him his speed buff, meaning that your S1 can now kill the Arby. Now, the S1 like extra proc defense break is still only one attack, so that's not good into Tempest Cern if you're wondering. But it can double kill an RB and it can do huge damage. If you happen to Dust Devil proc on top of that, and the Dust Devil goes into the defense break, you could kill pretty much any unit in the game. So Sid very, very strong now and very scary. Then we have Ray, one of the best cleansers in the game. He has a good res, he's got decent speed, and he cleanses into immunity. So something somewhat rare. But the fact that he cleanses into immunity is what makes him so good, and one of the best cleansers in the game. He does take a bit of a hit just because the one, DJ Bassar got a buff, but two, the debuff meta has kind of settled down a little bit. So he's not as prevalent as he was. Like, you're not going to see 2 strips and a bunch of debuffers after just trying to lock you down. It just doesn't exist anymore because everybody has built somebody like Ray to counter it. And that's why. Next, we have Pavel. Now, Pavel, you're seeing in a lot of cleaves because he is a full attack cleave opener, whereas units like Oxlots don't get used as much because, obviously, with the non-attack skill, the poly can counter it. He is part of the wave of the cleave meta, so you are seeing him quite a bit. I do think he's kind of tricky to use because he doesn't have souls and he needs them. So he's not as easy to use as you might think. Banning the souls usually deals with him quite well, but if he has good gear, he can do huge damage. He can be very scary and can nuke pretty much anybody depending on the gear. Also has very good base speed. So if you see a Pavel in RTA, he's probably going to go first. Should put that out there. Next, we have Senya, and we talked earlier about Mort, and we talked earlier about Charles. Who else did we talk about on this list? Oh, we were talking about Purchase as well, being like a strange countercleave unit. So Senya is the new counter cleave unit in terms of those like random RNG ones. She, first of all, can either hold her own artifact, which does bonus damage, which is really strong. Think something like Drink for SSB. Or she can hold something like Adamant and make you tankier. The thing that makes her good is that she does okay AoE damage, which can be good against cleaves. But more importantly, she puts up counter buff, which means that every time somebody hits her, she will counter them. And unless that gets stripped, she can solo an entire team. I've seen it happen many times, both on my team and against me. Um, she's very scary. She's not hard to build, but she does take very specific gear and a big investment as well. So you would probably have to plus 15 her if you're going to make her work. But she can work very, very well. I've been using her in my counter cleave quite a bit recently, and it's had huge success. So make sure you check her out if you're looking for something to counter cleave, as she is the best option now, especially in terms of the wind units. Not the best option, I shouldn't say that. Best option out of the ones that we already went through. And then we have Vivian, the end of the nature tier for this, for the S tier. The nice thing about her, she has a team attack buff, team immunity, and she can turn cycle herself, and she can do huge AoE damage. She's used a lot in speed clears for PvE, but you can also use her in PvP as the attack buff and the immunity can come in very handy. Very scary unit in the right situation. Every situation isn't her situation, though, in PvP. So just make sure you bring her into the right spots, and she'll serve you well. But she's got a very fun kit, and her S2 is only on a 2-turn cooldown, so you can use it non-stop, which is really nice as well. Moving on to the light and dark units, the ones everybody's excited about here. Alright, so we already kind of blended into the light units with that Watcher Shuri, but we're going to start with ML Era. ML Era, I feel like I should maybe move down in this tier list, but we're only at S rank, and I still feel like she's very scary. Like, if she gets a turn, you're probably dead. Like, if she gets picked, you're going to ban her. Like, you know what's coming. The problem is, because of that, she's kind of easy to play around, so she's not in a great spot. Especially with somebody like Carrot out there who kind of does the same thing. She doesn't have the stun, but in terms of the damage, it's the same. I wouldn't be surprised to see Era get a buff at some point, but I still don't think she's bad. She's not bad enough to move down. The reason I think she hasn't gotten a buff yet is because if she gets one, she's going to be like broken OP and could be meta defining. So we'd have to see. Then we have Roman, another one of those strips that is very good, but there's just better strips out there. You guys all know what Roman does. Very good, and very scary, because if he pops off, you're in trouble. The problem is, if he doesn't, you're also in trouble. So, very RNG strip. Not really reliable enough for most people, but if you don't mind the RNG, then go for it. Then we have C. Armin. C. Armin actually moved up on this list. She got a nice buff semi-recently as well. And because of all the cleaves recently, she's moved up on this list into the S tier. She's becoming more and more prevalent. Depending on how things go, you might even see her move up a tier in the following quarter, but for now, we got her in S tier, as she does provide invincibility and 3-turn immunity. 3-turn immunity being very rare. So keep her in mind for your counter cleaves as well if you need something just to tank up. Speaking of things that just help tank up, we got one of the best defense buffers in the game in Doris. We already talked about Crow. I feel like they kind of provide similar value. Personally, if I was going to take one of the two, I would take the Doris, because she does bring heals along with CR boost and other things to her kit other than just the defense buff. But if you don't want to use Crow, or you want to substitute for Crow when he gets banned or when somebody else takes him, she's a great option. She's very annoying to deal with. Next up, we have Mursa, another speed imprint. Her speed imprint is a little bit less, but she does have 70% evasion once you put Dreamblade on her, so she can be really annoying in counter cleave setups, or just even in cleave setups. She can do huge damage, and it's only 10 souls to burn into her skill 3, and you can one-shot almost anything when you get speed buff, attack buff, which she gets passively. Then we have Judge Kize. Judge Kize has fallen so far in this list. She used to be a triple S unit. She's fallen all the way down to the S tier because she is kind of hard to use right now. She is probably the best AoE cleaver out there, but the problem with that is that you need huge stats on her, which means she has to be slow and you have to boost her, which means Polly hard counters her. If Polly, as we kind of predicted earlier, does end up falling out of the defense meta, then Judge Kize could come back into the meta again and become OP, so she may end up moving up if Polly goes down. Otherwise, she's going to remain somewhat hard to use. Next, we have Specimen Says. Specimen Says has gotten a bunch of buffs, and he's very, very scary. He's probably in RTA, he probably has the highest percent ban rate, if that makes sense. Like, whenever somebody picks Spez, he gets banned. You're never going to see Spez get through. Does that make him bad, or does that make him good? I don't really know. But he really probably does have the highest percentage of ban rate, because people know if he gets through, he's just going to delete people. And he's probably going to be annoying to kill, and he's going to counter stun you. The reason you don't get a lot of Spez highlights on YouTube or on Twitch is just because he gets banned 99% of the time. But he is very scary. Unfortunately, I don't have him, so I can't use him, but realistically, he'd probably get banned anyway. Moving over to the dark units, we start with Oxlots. Oxlots, again, used to be triple S. He dropped down. The poly effect kind of had a hard time on him. I still use him a lot. The problem is that if you're going to use him, you have to bring something with him. So something like Crescent Moon Rin to go before him and put up immunity, or whatever it is, you got to plan around it. He is still very valuable, though, as he has 100% CR push, and it's only on a 2-turn cooldown. Plus, he can hold book. He just does too much to ever fall any lower than this, but he does fall from double S to single S. Then we have Champ Zerato. Probably, I don't know. I don't think he's ever been higher than this, but he's. I can't bring him any lower either. I feel like he's not in a good spot, but when he works, he works. A lot of people still swear by him, despite the fact that he doesn't do very well at high level RTA. But for certain comps, he can still be very good. As it kind of like forces people to play around him. He is another unit though, like an ML Ken, or I forget who the other one was we mentioned, that you can just kind of ignore them. And I don't really like units that can just be ignored like that until the end. So basically, what you do with Zerato is starts 4v4, you kill the other 3 units, and then you just hope your 4 units can kill him. And odds are he's not going to solo your whole team. So. Moving on, we got Cdom. Cdom's another one who dropped from double S to single S, courtesy of the poly effect. You don't need to necessarily build her with no crit, which means she doesn't necessarily need to use her skill 3. So if you rebuild her, she's still fine. You do see her a lot right now in Cerise Cleaves. So she's in those Cerise Cleaves a lot, and she's working very well still. So she's definitely not fallen off. But she's not as strong as she used to be. She used to be crazy strong in that triple S category, or in the double S category. But she can still one-shot damn near anything, as well as turn cycle very, very fast. Next, we got Apocalypse Ravi. Apocalypse Ravi is another one that took a huge hit. She used to be triple S on this list, and then she dropped to double S, and now she's down to single S. She's not going to go any lower because she's still the second best reviver in the game. Anyone that can nuke something and revive something at full CR has a ton of value. Not to mention the fact that she's damn near impossible to kill. Unfortunately for her, LQC is very meta right now, and there's a lot of one-shot units like Strays and Watchashuri and Operator Sigrid that are all going to deal with her quite easily. And Spectre as well. On top of the fact there's a lot of skills that can't proc counter, so there's just a lot of units out there that now counter her that has kind of, even though she's the same, has kind of hurt her value a little bit. Then we have Troublemaker Crozet, similar to C. Armin. Very good for tanking up. I don't necessarily like him counter cleave, but if you're trying to counter up and run like a Protect the Spectre comp or whoever you're trying to protect, you definitely run Crozet in that comp. He's very good for that. Just don't get it confused and try and bring him Countercleave, because he probably won't work Countercleave. Then we have Meteor Cowrick. Meteor Cowrick's first appearance on this tier list is he wasn't in the game with the last one. I got him in at the S tier. I know I'm going to hear about this one, but he's actually very, very good. Anyone who has been on my stream anyway, has seen how good he is, and we've talked about it many times. So I'm sure most of you won't be surprised by this. People who maybe don't attend many Twitch streams or don't watch a lot of YouTube, maybe you'll be a little bit surprised by this, because he does get talked poorly about a lot. Reason being is, think about it this way. He's not a good ML 5-star. Let's put that out there. But if he was a 3-star, if he was like a Doris or something like that got a specialty change, people would be talking about how incredibly OP he is and how busted he is. The reason people kind of crap on him a lot is because they didn't want to use their Mystic Pity on him. And I get that. I didn't use my Mystic Pity on him either, especially when Strays came out next. I was very happy to get Strays over Cowrick. That being said, I really wish I had Cowrick. Cowrick does something that no other unit in the game does, and it makes him very, very valuable if you happen to summon him. He has a full cleanse. He can hold Strack because he's a warrior. And not only does he have the full cleanse and can hold Strack, which means you can get him very fast and very high res, similar to Kitty Clarissa, but he gives you immunity and attack buff. So you have a unit like Ray, who we talked about earlier. He provides immunity and cleanse and a small heal, but that's very good into like bruisers. But if you say you're going into an LQC and you need attack buff, you have to bring Ray to cleanse, and then you have to bring, say, a DN to attack buff, and then you have to bring LQC. Whereas with Cowrick, you can just bring him, because he does all of those things together. He's the only unit in the game that does cleanse, immunity, and attack buff. So definitely keep him in mind. And if you summon him, consider yourself lucky. Granted, he's not the best ML5, but he still has an incredible kit, and he's very, very useful. Just because people talk bad about him doesn't mean he's not good. Obviously, he's not triple S or anything, but that doesn't mean he's a bad unit. So give him some love, give him some gear. I would use mine all the time if I had one. So anyway, moving on. Syngelica is going to be the final unit in our S tier. I actually moved her up. She was in A tier last quarter. I moved her up for one reason and one reason only, and that is because Maid Chloe got a buff, and she's everywhere right now. I warned everybody about the Maid Chloe buff. I talked about this last tier list. I said, if you buff Maid Chloe, she's going to be broken because she's already really good. And everybody said, no, 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 Maid Chloe's bad, Maid Chloe's bad. And here we are. So, not that I want to say I told you so, but I kind of told you so. But anyway, Syngelica is one of the best counters to Maid Chloe, as you can just go by and just kill everybody one by one, and Maid won't do anything about it. So if you have Syngelica, you probably need to gear her up now. I know I had mine geared, and I geared her better because of the buff. All right, back to the beginning and up to double S now. So now we're into the best units in the game. We're into the top 20, 30 units in the game now. These units are all OP in their own way. And let's start with the water units. First off, Fairy Tale Tenebria. So Fairy Tale Tenebria was triple S last quarter. I did move her down one because we're not seeing her nearly as often. And when we are, there's a lot more counters to her now. With Ray, DJ Bassar, Cowrick, all those units that have crazy cleanses. She's just not quite as good as she was. She's still OP. But she's fallen out of that triple S tier. Next up, we have Chu. Chu recently got a buff as well. One of the best bruisers in the game in terms of RGB. Very, very good. She does have anti-crit as well, which is a little RNG, but she can also one-shot units like Carrot and like Ravi, given the right situations. One of the better Ravi counter, or better one of the better Ravi and Carrot counters out there. With Fire being quite a bit stronger than it used to be, Chu is still very, very good. Next up, we have Dian. DN still double S. With people needing attack buff for Landy, Carrot, and LQC, you're gonna see her up here a lot. Any attack buffers are gonna be up here a lot, so that's why she's there. Um, Wait, what happened to Did I skip a tier? No, nope, we're good. We're good. I thought I skipped somebody again. Every tier list I put out, I end up missing a whole block of people. But I think we're still good. But yeah, attack buff. She's got a cleanse. She's got anti crit. She's got shield. She can heal if you put her on rod. Very good kit. Always going to be top tier, especially with these type semi bruiser damage dealers that we're going to talk about later. Next up, another unit that used to be triple S, and I dropped her down as well, is Cerise. So, again, with all the cleansers out there and all the ways to deal with cleave, the Cerise cleaves taking a bit of a hit, even though you're probably seeing them more for now. I think those are going to change a little bit. People are probably leaning a little bit toward more toward things like Pavel and other boosters. She's still good. She's still OP, but she's not as good as she was completely busted there for a little bit. Next, we have Kize. And Kize is another one. Great unit. The main reason she's up this high is because of Carrot. She's still one of the better Carrot counters out there. She can go first and reset her skills on turn 1. And then she puts herself into stealth and can just pick things off one by one. She is a little bit hard to use because there's so many AoEs out there that can knock her out of stealth. Thankfully, she has that shield, which helps her quite a bit. But she'll definitely never be higher than this because she really only has the one role. I actually hesitated having her up this high. I kind of feel like she should be S because she doesn't really have a role anywhere else. But with Carrot being one of the few units in Triple S right now, and her being one of the main counters, she gets promoted by default. Next up, we have Sigrid. Sigrid is still the best unit to clear the most important content in the game, which is Wyvern. She also does massive damage. You can use her in PvE. You can use her in PvP. She's still one of the best RB counters in the game. You can kill multiple units in Guild War with her. She's just crazy. Her damage is so insanely strong. Because she is the best Wyvern unit in the game, she has to keep this rank regardless. She used to be triple S as well. She got moved down to double S, but she'll never drop any lower than that, just because she does so much. She's another one that can actually clear Epic Hell of the new side story as well. You can go attack break, defense buff, burn into Sigrid, and just kill that boss all at once with her S2, S1, S3 combo. Then we have Elena. Elena just recently got a buff, and she moves up from single S into the double S tier because of it. The fact that she passively gets Tome has made a huge difference, and we're starting to see her all over the place. Partially because she gets free Tome, so you can run Tome and get double the boost. You can run Doctor's Bag, which also got a buff, which means she insta-cleanses. She just has a lot of options now. You can also run Celestine to get the every turn heal. She's very flexible now, and because you don't necessarily know how she's built, she's getting somewhat annoying to deal with. So she moves up this list alongside some of these other OP water units. Moving on within the double S tier, first up for fire, we have Charlotte. So Charlotte has skyrocketed up this list from a long time ago. She used to be one of the worst units in the game and has moved all the way up to double S, mainly because she deals very well with two of the units in the triple S tier. She's a Landy counter, she's a Spectre counter, and she's a Carrot counter. She doesn't fully counter Carrot, but if people try and bring Carrot and Landy, you're most likely going to see Fire Charlotte into it because it's one of the few things that doesn't have element disadvantage against either of them. Also, if they hit her, she's going to buff herself with defense buff and attack buff. Many different builds for her out there, but she's very, very good right now. Does huge damage and is pretty tanky and can take a hit. So keep an eye out for her. If you see a Charlotte, you should be worried because she's probably going to one-shot your entire team. Next up, we have Fire Ravi. And Fire Ravi used to be triple S as well. I moved her down a tier this quarter because of Carrot. She's kind of been replaced as the top fire unit bruiser in the game, so she drops down one. And still very, very strong. She's still OP, but she's not the top anymore, so she has to move down a tier. Moving on to the nature units. We got 4 units in the double S tier. First up, we got Izaria. She stays in the same spot. I know a lot of people are probably surprised to see her here, but she's another one that if you see Izaria, you better be scared. And she probably has one of the highest ban rates in RTA as well. As whenever she gets picked, she's going to get banned. She's going to be paired with something that's going to be very scary. Whether it be Corvus, or it be Izaria, or it be Strays, or whoever it is, she's going to be scary, resetting those long cooldown skill 3s that are just going to destroy your entire team. Part of the reason you don't see her a lot is just because she always gets banned, so people kind of forget about her. Then we have Alencia. Alencia has fallen 1 tier from triple S down to double S. She's still insanely strong, but with the debuff meta not being as strong as it once was, she does drop down a tier to double S. She still has the best defense buff, in my opinion, in the game. She comes along with the strip. She's got single target nuke. She's got AoE nuke. She's got a defense break. She has an insane kit. She's still incredibly OP. But with Carrot meta being so strong right now, and Fire in general, as we just looked at, 3 of the top units in the game was Charlotte, Ravi, and Carrot. And we haven't even mentioned Cecilia yet. She is going to take a little bit of a hit, particularly with it being more of a cleave meta than it once was. She's still very good counter cleave, but she's not necessarily something you'd want to say is the best unit in the game anymore. Up next, we have Basar. Basar still, he's the best strip in the game. You still have other options, but in terms of just purely being strip, he's the only irresistible strip in the game. So obviously OP. I did move him down a tier as well from triple S. Partially again because the debuff meta just isn't as strong as it once was, and Fire's a lot stronger as well. So he takes a bit of a hit. Still OP, but he drops down to the double S tier. And everything I just said about Flurry everything I just said about Basar also applies to Flurry. Insanely strong. She's just not triple S anymore, as she's not meta defining like she once was. Moving on to the light and dark units. As we have with the last couple of tier lists, I have these split up a little bit. Can I move this over? I don't want to go too far over, but excuse the white border there, but I don't want the camera to get in the way. I guess I could move it up, right? There. Is that better? There we go. All right, so we have these split up into double S in this row. And then if we move up one, these are like double S plus. So these are going to be the units kind of in between double S and triple S. We'll get to them next. But as you can see, there is only a few units in triple S, so that's why I kind of put those in between, because I don't feel like they belong in double S, but I also don't feel like they're quite strong enough to be in triple S. So leading off the double S for the light units is General Purchase. He is everywhere. He is my go-to pre-ban for RTA. You've got him in leading off your Wyvern team. You've got him in Guild War. You've got him in Arena. You've got him in RTA. He's all over the place. He's very annoying to deal with. With his new scaling, he can now do good damage, as well as CR boosting the entire team all the time and giving attack buff. We already talked about how strong attack buff is, so he gets into double S. Excuse me again. Jesus. My body's like, man, you've been talking for an hour and a half. Wrap this thing up. Next up, we got DJ Basar. So we already talked about Ray being one of the best cleansers in the game, and he is, but DJ Basar with his buff puts him over the top and now makes him best in slot for countering control teams or debuff teams. And the only reason he's not triple S is because of those debuff teams have fallen down a little bit. But DJ Basar, one of the best units in the game right now. Even without people bringing debuffs, you still see DJ Basar at high levels, especially in Asia server and Korea server. You're seeing him a lot. Just the fact that he boosts his entire team, self-cleanses any potential early units, takes all those debuffs off, boosts the entire team and heals all at the same time with incredible base stats is, I mean, he is ridiculously good. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but I think he's going to be in the next coin shop. So if you have coins, you might want to scoop him up, particularly if you don't have a lot of cleansers built, because he is just ridiculously strong right now. Then we have Ruel of Light. Ruel of Light's an interesting one because I did move her up in this tier list. I moved her down quite savagely last quarter. She was all the way down, I think, in A tier. She might maybe S tier, I don't remember. But we moved her back to double S, and the reason being, it might not even be noticeable yet, but I moved her back up because the res scaling in RTA has reverted back to being super toxic and basically allowing things to resist for the eternity of the fight. Um, that could make her much better. Now, could she move back down again? Definitely. But for now, I did move her back up into that double S tier just because she isn't going to be as easy to get debuffed later in RTA fights. And I think by default that makes her better. So it's kind of a guess since RTA is still early in the preseason and we haven't really had a chance to see it yet. But a little foreshadowing, I have a feeling that she's going to be a little bit more back in the meta than she was this past season. Next, we got Tempest Surin, a lot of people's favorite unit. I don't use her very much. I have a hard time using her for some reason, but she's still very good and very prevalent in a lot of defenses and counter cleave setups. So if you have a good Tempest Surin, you understand why she's up this high. She can be very annoying to deal with in the right situation. So you do definitely, she definitely does make you work your team around her, which is something that gives her value in itself. Moving on to the dark units, double S, we got Spectre Tenebria. So Spectre, for a very short period of time, was very, very strong, and there's a lot of Protect the Spectre comps out there. You don't see them nearly as often anymore. They're still out there, but just not as often. So she falls in at double S. I don't at all think she's broken. There's so many good AoEs out there with Arby, Landy, Carrot, Sigrid, Strays. All those things counter Tenebria, so she's still very good and still OP, but she is in the double S tier. Then we have Rylet. I think we were talking about this on stream the other day. Greg's favorite unit in the entire game, but Rylet still in this double S tier, mainly because there aren't many things that just hard counter him. You've got something like Briar who you can bring into him, but she doesn't really counter him all that well. Like, she's more than likely going to miss on him every time anyway. Like, I intentionally don't bring Briar into him because I'm too worried of losing just because she misses. The reason also that he's up here is a lot of people are starting to build him fast again. People had switched only over to tanky Rylets, which I think was really bad build for him. But now that they're starting to go back and it's a little more flexible, just the fact that you don't know if he's fast or slow makes him scary. So yeah, he gets that double S rank. He can still solo fights no matter what gear he's on. So that's why he gets the double S rank. It's just the ability to solo there, similar to like a Ravi. Then Briar, as we just touched on briefly, another very strong strip. She was triple S there for a bit because she was the one unit that you just couldn't deal with. If she went first, you lost, and there's nothing you could do about it. But now she's a little bit easier to deal with. I've actually seen people start changing her gear a little bit just because of the meta shift. People are building her ultra fast now instead of that in-between speed. Trying to go first and get that first turn, strip, attack, break, buff block. So I do think she drops a little bit, but she's still OP, and she will decimate many, many comps out there. Next up, we have Strays. So Strays just came out. This is sort of a feeler rating. We could have left him off the list for now if I didn't feel like we had a pretty good gauge on where he stands. A lot of people think he's OP. A lot of people think he needs a buff. I think he's kind of right in between. I think he's right where he should be. I think he's pretty balanced. He does his job at nuking like an FCC or something or a crowd, but he's not too strong because, like, say you're going against an FCC and a Tenebria, you can't focus the Tenebria. Like, you can't focus or an FCC and a Landy. Like, he's never going to kill that Landy. He's always going to kill the FCC. You can't pick who to do the damage to. And I think that keeps him in check, so to speak. So he also needs pretty good gear to work. He's not going to work very well in bruiser comps. I think he's strictly a cleave unit for the most part. I did see somebody run a protect the strays comp yesterday, which I thought was a lot of fun. But for the most part, you're not going to see him in many bruiser comps. But I think he's in a pretty good spot. He's got an irresistible strip on his skill 2. If you need to, you can burn into it. I do really like his skill 2, but I don't think it's broken in any way. He's strong for cleaves, but he's kind of hard to use, and I think a lot of people have already stopped using him. I have a feeling, though, he'll balance out somewhere around this double S rank. Moving on to the double S plus, we have Flitica. So Flitica, still top tier with cleave being so meta. You have to have her here. She's got that skill reset, the strip, the boost. You name it, she does it. Plus good base speed. I mean, she does something that nobody else does with that skill reset, and for that reason, she's always going to be top tier. Moving on, we have Last Rider Crowd. I don't know why his picture is different, but anyway, Last Rider Crowd. He was triple S. I did drop him down from triple S to double S plus. Reason being is he's just not as meta as he was. He's still like he used to be meta defining. He's just not necessarily anymore. But he's still crazy strong. I wish I had him. Unfortunately, I don't. He is countered by the thing is with him. The reason he drops, if we're being completely honest, is he was hard countered by Landy, which dropped him down a little bit, and then he gets that little boost up again because Landy isn't as prevalent. So there's so many like Landy carrot combos out there that people are just kind of shying away from him. Not only that, but also with Operator Sigret, his shields are abusable. So makes him a little bit scary with all the Operator Sigrets floating around. So all those things combined, he drops down half a rank. Next up, we have Sage Ball, and I actually moved Sage Ball up a little bit here. We had him in double S, I believe, last quarter, and I moved him up to double S plus. Reason being because there are so many cleaves out there right now. Everybody and their brother is trying to cleave, whether it be Cerise cleaves, Flitica cleaves, Oxlot's cleaves, Pavo cleaves, whatever they're running. Sage Ball is probably going to be good into them. So if you have Sage Ball, you should probably build him because he's going to be one of the top counter cleave units out there. And the final unit in the double S plus for the light units is Ambitious Tywin. He's another one. He was triple S. I was going to drop him down to double S, but I feel like that's a little too much. He's still so strong and oppressive. If he gets cycling at the end of a fight with his stuns and slows, he can just solo a fight. Especially, so now with the res changes going back to the way they were, he's not going to be as good as he was at one point. He was a guaranteed win when there was no res anymore. He would just guaranteed solo, so he can't do that anymore. But he's still very strong. Another unit that I unfortunately don't have, but I wish I did because still one of the best units in the game and crazy OP. Over to the dark units. First up, Operator Sigrid. Now, I almost put her triple S. I'm undecided. We'll see. I feel like she could easily be triple S. If there was a rank in between these two, I would have her there. I think there are currently, I think we have 7 units. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, we have 8 units in triple S. If there was 10, she'd be part of the top 10, for sure. She would be number 9, I think. Either number 9 or number 10. Definitely one of the best units in the game. One of the best cleave units in the game. And very good against a lot of the top units in the game. As she's very good against Fallen Cecilia. She's very good against Crow. She's very good against Carrot. She's even good against Arby, depending on the Arby build. Like, there's so many things that are top tier that she's good against that she would be good without her buff. But with the buff and making her irresistible on her strip as well, and changing her speed scaling a little bit, she's very scary and very hard to deal with. especially with multiple builds out there. All right, next up we have Blood Moon Haste. So Blood Moon Haste, one of the best counters to Arby and one of the best counters to Maid Chloe out there. We talked about Singelica earlier. I do have him slightly ahead of both of them because into a Maid comp, as soon as you kill one unit, if you have a haste, you've probably won the fight. It's not necessarily the case with Singelica, so I have him slightly ahead of her. Also, he brings the heal and he brings his own damage, which is really nice. Kind of a toss-up, but I think Blood Moon Haste deserves this double S plus ranking, mainly because of his damage as well. It really helps kind of solidify his place as one of the best units in the game. Up next, and if we were rounding out the top 10 units in the game, this would be in there at either number 9 or number 10 alongside Sigurd, would be Designer Lilibet. Designer Lilibet is, you could argue, the best counter to this meta that is out there right now. So if you're not just picking meta units, but you need something to counter meta units, Designer Lilibet is the answer. She is the best counter to Flan. She's the best counter to Cerise. She's the best counter to Bassar. She's the best counter to Tenebria. Like, you name it, she counters it. Not to mention that, but she also can do it repeatedly. So as the fight goes on, she's constantly CR boosting herself. And she provides insane damage. Like, she can... I've gone into cleaves where I've had 4 units that survive the cleave, and then she moves, and she 90%s the entire team all by herself. I'm like, oh. And then... not only that, but she also reset their skills. Like, it's just ridiculous. Her kit is so loaded. I've seen people saying she's bad and needs a buff. Whatever you're drinking, you gotta switch because Lilibet is beyond good. You see her all over the place in like top 100, top 200 RTA. Especially in Asia server, Korea server. It's ridiculous how strong she is. Up next, we have Top Model Lulu. Top Model Lulu is still up here. I actually debated moving her down into normal double S because she's a little harder to use than she was. I feel like the meta, though, is kind of leaning toward her a little bit again. Because, yes, Poly counters her S2, but you don't necessarily have to S2. You can always go straight into S3. Depending on what you're doing, who you're fighting, and what the situation is. And she can, if you have her built right, she can still one-shot a tanky RB as well. So keep that in mind. I just couldn't justify dropping her any lower. And I think she's kind of moving, she's kind of on the upswing right now in terms of her usage, especially with all the Maid Chloes out there. Her Extinct is ultra, ultra powerful. And finally, the Triple S tier. So we only have 8 units in the Triple S tier, which means we're almost done. The Triple S tier is... there we go. Not that far. Triple S tier is the best units in the game. So you'll notice across the first 3 elements, we have the top bruiser from each element in the game is all Triple S. SSB, Carrot, and Landy. They're all meta-defining. SSB, best water bruiser by far. You guys all know what she does. She got the defense breaks. She counters non-stop, providing crazy damage, especially with her artifact. Plus, she's got buff block. She's got heal block. She's got target. She's one of the best Wyvern units in the game as well, outside of Sigrid. Like, you name it, SSB does it. There's entire units based around countering her. Very much meta-defining. Moving on to the next one, we have Carrot. Carrot in herself has changed the meta, as she has been the counter to Landy. Maybe we should do Landy first, because we're going in order. We went SSB, let's move over to Landy. Landy was the supposed to be the counter to SSB and Last Rider Crow, as she just shut down so many of those water units. She's so good. Like, if we take a look at these water units really quickly, so good against all these water units. Crow, Elena, Tenebria, Chu, DN, Cerise, SSB. She's good against everybody. Very, very scary unit to deal with when it was a very water-heavy meta at the time. And then all of a sudden, they introduced Carrot to counter the Landy, and also is kind of still good against SSB. Not great. Like, some people will still bring SSB into Carrot, but I don't recommend it because she does burn herself when she counters. But yeah, the fact that she came in and disrupted the meta yet again, and so good against all the nature units. If we switch over to the nature units, even some of the dark units, like, she's so good against Landy. She's decent against Valencia. Good against things like Pavel, Vildred, Flurry, Basar, Izaria, like all those units. She's very, very good against. She's also very good against Spectre, who's one of the units we talked about in the MLs. You guys all know by now how good Carrot is, and that's why she kind of took over for Ravi and Charlotte as well. She's also very good into Poly, Kron, like all these fire units as well. And she can always land against water as well. You never know, right? She's still got the 50-50 there. To finish up the RGB units, the only non-bruiser that we have in Triple S is going to be Cecilia again. So there are a bunch of water units and a bunch of debuffers in this rank, but since they've kind of fallen off, Cecilia gets the trophy, I guess, for the only non-bruiser RGB unit into Triple S, mainly because her kit is just stacked. I know people are going to hate this and be like, oh, you're just saying that because you like her. It's because of her kit. Like, if you read her kit, it's insane. She has her S3 has AoE immunity plus AoE provoke, which is essentially just as good as an AoE stun that you get from Tywin. Everybody thinks Tywin's the most busted unit in the game, but you get the AoE provoke, plus she gets a shield, so any of those provoked attacks that go into her aren't going to do any damage. So it's essentially the same as a stun. Plus AoE immunity, in case you miss, 2-turn immunity. Then her S2, she has an AoE strip on a 0-turn cooldown if you burn into it, so you can strip every single turn. That strip also has attack break, and it has slow. Slow, one of the most debilitating debuffs in the game. All in the exact same skill, and you can do it every single turn. And then if that wasn't enough, with her S1, she's got a defense break that's probably one of the best, if not the best, S1 defense breaks in the game. I'm trying to think who would be better. I'm not sure, but I guess Sid. But yeah, her kit is just absolutely loaded. Add to that, you can put her on Aureus or Adamant. It blows me away that more people don't use her. I don't understand. Every time I see her, I'm like, oh crap. Anyway, moving on, we're going to go to the final few units here in the light and dark units. First up, we got Maid Chloe. Why did that get clicked? There we go. First up, we got Maid Chloe. She did get a big buff, and as we talked about earlier in the video, I warned everybody that she was going to be crazy if she got buffed, and here we are. It is officially a Maid Chloe meta. On top of her AoE revive, she's the only AoE reviver in the game already, plus an AoE attack buff. She now is also a cleanser, plus she's got heals, plus she's got a great chance to stun with her S1, plus she's CR boost if she stuns or attacks into a stun, plus she heals. You name it, she does it. She's a big part of the rise of some of the units like Blood Moon Haste and Singelica. It's crazy how much she's affected the meta already. She's also helped single-handedly eliminate a lot of the debuff meta because a lot of people didn't want to build units like Ray or DJ Basar, but they didn't mind building Maid Chloe. So now they're having an easier time countering those debuffs that they could have probably countered before with Ray, but they just didn't want to build them. So she's single-handedly brought units up on one side and brought other units down, as have been reflected on this tier list, with all the debuffers dropping in rank, pretty much because of Maid Chloe. And up next, we have LQC. LQC with all these crazy dark units over here. She has the ability to not only nuke them, but to solo whole teams of them by herself. I did put out a whole LQC video if you want to see how to build her. A lot of people are running her on Hellcutter for the one-shot damage on turn 1. I still don't think that's the best build. I think she's 100 times better on Scythe. But either way, no matter how you gear her, she's going to be super scary. She is the best dark unit counter in the game for Guild War Arena and RTA. Plus, you can use her in PvE as well. One of the scariest units out there right now, and thankfully one of the units that I'm sure everybody on this list is going to agree with, because she's crazy hard to deal with. Moving on, we got Arby, of course. There was a time when he would have been way up here somewhere, but Arby is going to be in this triple S tier probably forever, basically because of Basket. Until they decide to balance Basket, he is going to be broken because he can proc greater attack on his skill 3 every single turn and potentially have an AoE greater attack nuke like 4, 5, 6, 7 times in a row. And there's nothing you can do about it. He's just going to keep doing it. So until they balance Basket, he is going to be triple S. If Basket didn't exist, I would probably have him in double S already. Not even double S plus. He'd probably be double S. Thankfully, they decided to give everybody an RB with that connection thing. So nobody can complain they don't have him anymore. But he is still definitely triple S, at least for the time being. And our final unit of the tier list is going to be FCC. FCC still triple S, even though Sigrid is out there, which is a testament to how strong she is. She is being used a lot less. People are scared to take shields because of Operator Sigrid, especially in Countercleave, but she's still crazy. She's so good in Arena. She's so good. Countercleave, she's so good in Guild War. She's so good in RTA. She's good in PvE. She is the only in the game that can offer as much protection as she does, with shields every single turns, AoE skill prevent, AoE shields to start the fight. She's ridiculous, not to mention her provokes on her skill 1. If you have her, you should definitely build her. So that is going to be it for today's tier list. Let's move this over and get it a little bit centered here. I'll give you guys a brief run through here. If you want to take a look at the whole thing and kind of see where we are or where the unit is you're looking for on the list. Make sure we get everybody on here. There we go. Again, there will be a hard copy of this in Discord at some point. Just not yet. I want to make sure people actually watch the video first so I don't have to answer these questions twice. But I hope you guys appreciate the video. We did make it under 2 hours, so it's a slight miracle. But that's going to be it for today, guys. I hope you guys liked the video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, as this video does take a long time to put together. You can see with all those units, trying to figure out what I'm going to say about them all, and doing it especially all in one take in like a 2-hour video, along with actually making the list itself and like getting all their thumbnails together and putting them where we need them to be, is very time consuming. So any support would be greatly appreciated. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say and your opinions in the comment section down below. Make sure you keep it clean and friendly. Any hateful comments toward either me or anybody else in chat will be deleted. And I know there's always some of you that insist on doing it, but we're going to keep it clean. If you guys want to come say hi, there will be links to the Discord down below, as well as my Twitch channel. If you want to come say hi on Twitch, it is twitch.tv/fivefingershuffle. I hope you all have a great night, and we'll see you all next time. Bye for now, guys.